Well, good day and welcome back. Well, here's a typewriter that I didn't expect to be reviewing. This is an Olympia Traveller C. I've heard of them, I've never seen one. So at our recent Type-In in early October of this year, our friend Matt brought this to the Type-In. And I was immediately interested in it because, well, on the back it tells you the country of origin, and it also looks like another typewriter in my collection from a different country of origin. I know that's a little cryptic statement. Let's look at the Olympia Traveller C. Stay tuned. Well, to open the clamshell lid, you slide the two knobs back and lift up the front of the machine and then slide it slightly to the rear, and you can take the clamshell lid off. So once you remove that curvy plastic lid to the body, you have this also curvy plastic body. And as soon as I looked at this and then looked at the carriage, I said to myself, that carriage looks very familiar. I've seen that in another typewriter. Well, here's the other typewriter that this reminded me of as soon as I saw it. And that is the Royal Mercury. So this is obviously a squarish, boxy-looking typewriter from the early 1970s, 1971, I believe. This, on the other hand, is very curvy and swoopy, and the Mercury has metal body panels. This has plastic body panels, but man, when I look at the carriages and the mechanism, it's the same mechanism, the same carriage, almost. So when I look on the back panel of the Royal Mercury, it clearly says right above the serial number, it says Made in Japan. But when I look on the back panel of the Traveller C, it clearly says Made in China. That's right. This is a Made in China manual typewriter, and I find it quite fascinating. Well, so this is branded as an Olympia. Olympia has a long history. So Olympia did make a Traveller and a Traveller Deluxe. I think the Deluxe came out around the time that Olympia opened a factory in Sarajevo, Yugoslavia. So by the mid-1990s, a firm out of Hong Kong was licensed to use the Olympia brand name, and they marketed the Traveller C typewriter, but the Traveller C was made in Shenzhen, China. So there is a blog article written by Robert Messinger, and I'll link down below his article, but he talks a little bit about the history of Olympia and the Olympia Traveller C. So this was not a German-made typewriter. This was not European-made. This was manufactured in mainland China, but marketed by a company out of Hong Kong initially. But it's interesting is it uses the design of the Japanese Silver-Seiko chassis internally. So there is a question about accurate dates from the serial numbers. So on this serial number database, there are perhaps about a dozen Traveller Cs listed. All of those, and this one, the serial number begins with a 0. So some of the people on the typewriter database have taken the leading digit of 0 to mean that it was manufactured in the year 2000. But other people have taken the second digit, the digit past the 0, and use that as the year code. So some of them, when they have a 4, they're saying it's 2004. This one is 05, so it could mean that it's 2005, but it might also mean it was 1995. I'm not really sure. So there is some question as to the actual dating of these by the serial number. But we do know that earlier Olympia typewriters, many of them were date coded by the leading digit of the serial number indicating the year. So whether that was continued when the manufacturing went to Asia or not, we don't really know. But so from the perspective of 2024, looking back on a Chinese-made typewriter, as of this current video's date, there is a bad reputation for manual typewriters made in mainland China. Those typewriters deserve the bad reputation. They're little more than toys. They're not built very well at all. Even the letter alignment comes misaligned from the factory, etc. But I'd like to look at this typewriter because it came from an earlier time from Asia, and it was based on a known model that was pretty decent as a portable typewriter. So let's look at How good is this Chinese-made Olympia Traveller C? Well, let's weigh these typewriters. So we'll start with the Silver-Seiko. And it weighs about 4 kilograms. Now let's weigh the Traveller C. I want to make sure the full weight of it is on the scale. And it is 3.645 kilograms. So a little bit lighter than the Silver-Seiko model. So next I want to compare the two carriages. So to your left is the Royal Mercury Silver-Seiko model. To your right is the Traveller C. I have them facing backwards from each other so their left carriages are close together. So on the Silver-Seiko model, I should first point out to you the line spacing selector. Up above the 1 is a dot, and that dot is the carriage lock. So it has a positive carriage lock on the line spacing selector. The Traveller C has the same feature, like that. So both of them have the same locking system, and the two levers are almost the same shape as well, very similar. So then it has 1, 1.5, and 2 line spacing on both of them. And then there is a 0 point below the 2 line spacing, and the 0 point is the infinite variable for the platen. So you can disconnect the line spacing like that. So they're both essentially identical in that regards. The platen knobs are very similar, of course different colors, but a little slightly different shaped. But you can see where the Traveller's knob is patterned after the Mercury's. And I should also point out that one of the things about removing the platen on these Silver-Seiko models is the left-hand platen knob is left-hand threaded, so you have to turn it clockwise to loosen it. And there it loosens. And the Traveller C, the same way, turning it clockwise by holding the platen. Yes, it'll loosen the knob. So it's the same mechanism holding the platen together and the platen knob, the same exact thing. So the two carriage return levers are very similar in appearance, but not identical. But they both are stamped sheet metal, and they're both spring-loaded like that. And then looking at the margin settings, both margin setting knobs appear the same shape. There is a flat part and then a raised part toward the edge. There's grooves in it. Just the grooving on the Traveller C is not as abrupt, and also it's not really plated. It's much shinier metal on the Silver-Seiko. And there's also a red indicator triangle for the Silver-Seiko, whereas the Traveller C has just a very perceptible stamped triangle that you can barely see. But both of these operate the same way, push and slide to adjust the margin setting. It's a little stiffer to slide, and that might be indicative of the fact that it needs to be perhaps cleaned and lubed, but it doesn't move as easily as the Silver-Seiko model, that's for sure. It's quite a bit stiffer. And then the paper support finger on both of them, you flip the little end of it and it comes up like that. They're very similar in shape and height, and they don't have any scales or graduations on them. They're basically the same kind of paper support finger. Okay, on the right end of the platens, so for the Silver-Seiko machine, the paper release lever, you pull it back and that releases the feed roller tension. The same way on the Traveller C, you pull it back, it releases the feed roller tension. On both of those, it slightly releases the paper table up. You may not be able to see it as easily on the Traveller C at this angle, but it raises the paper table up. And then both of these paper bales are very, very similar. They are basically a flat stamped sheet metal with some graduations. In the Traveller C, they're just stamped in it. In the Silver-Seiko, they're stamped and then the marks are painted. Both of them have this little raised nub on the end of the right side of the bale, so you can use your finger to lift the bale up easily. So there is one big difference, though, in the carriages between the two machines is the Silver-Seiko just has the paper pan with paper scale, whereas the Traveller C has a erasing table behind the paper bale, and then the paper pan behind it. And the paper pan does have graduations also. So there is this additional erasing table that the Mercury doesn't have. So it might be good to compare the sound of the bells on both machines. Here's the Mercury. And here is the Traveller C. So now I think we need to look under the hood on both of them. And of course for the Mercury, it's pretty easy. You just pull it off like that. There's two little posts that fit into some grommets. But for the Traveller C, you have to put your fingers against the platen and just push forward like that. So there are two little protrusions here and here, and those just basically fit into these slots that are located here and here. Okay, so one of the things that really strikes me as very similar in both of these, you have the bracket here that holds the type bar support, and it has these two raised extensions on both of them. And then it has the same kind of type bar rest here. It is about a 1/4 inch black rubber tubing, and it's the same on the Traveller C. And the segment area is very similar as well. On the Mercury, the type guide has 2 screws. It's plated shiny metal, and on the Traveller C, it's 2 screws also, and it has a textured look to the type guide, but it's very similar. There is so much similar to these machines, it's clear that they were based on the same design. So this bar here and here, those are the ribbon universal bars. Whenever you type a letter, any of the linkages will push this lever up, and the lever will raise the vibrator and also advance the ribbon. This is one of the differences in construction between these two machines. So on the Mercury, underneath the ribbon spools, the mechanism that drives the ribbon spools and turns them and all that are metal parts. On the Traveller C, those parts underneath the ribbon spool are all plastic. And there is a guide here that the ribbon goes through. It's the reversing guide. It's also plastic. Whereas on the Mercury, the ribbon reversing guide is metal. So I think we should go ahead and measure some thickness differences between the two machines. So first of all, these brackets for the type bar rest, let's see, on the Mercury, they are 1.5 millimeters thick, and on the Traveller, it's about 1.25 millimeters. So a little bit thinner. So then let's measure a type bar on the Mercury. The type bar thickness is 1 millimeter approximately. And on the Traveller C, 0.9. So maybe 1/10 of a millimeter thinner. I'm just seeing a little bit thinner gauge of metal on a lot of this. But it's subtle, right? It's like fractions of a millimeter, not a huge amount. Now there's a couple things I noticed in the mechanism of the Traveller C that I don't understand. So here is the ribbon universal bar. There's these little slotted tabs, each corresponding to a type bar linkage, but there's 3 of them, this, and this, that are bent up a little bit. And it looks like it's purposeful. So the G, the Y, and the J are all bent up a little bit. I'm not sure why those are bent up. And it does look purposeful. They're bent the same amount. So that's just another mystery. So in order to access the ribbon to replace it, you have to take the front off, which I showed you was a little tricky. So to put it back on, you basically have to slide these 2 tabs into the slots. So you kind of set it like this and like that. And the front of it clips underneath the chassis, and the back clips in little spaces. So not too bad, but a little bit more difficult to do than on the Mercury. Okay, looking at the 2 keyboards of both machines. So on the Silver-Seiko, on the left we have the touch control, and the same touch control position here on the Traveller C. On the left we have the margin release, shift lock. The same margin release, shift lock. However, one big difference with the Traveller C is the margin release also doubles as a key de-jammer. So if I can jam 2 keys together, perhaps, then I can press the margin release and de-jam them. So over on the right side, you have your bichrome setting in the same position, and it is a 3-position switch on both machines. Now, here is one thing I find rather curious. This machine was made somewhere around between the mid-90s to the mid-aughts. I don't think there was any ditto machines being used that used stencils. So why they kept the stencil position, I think, was just because they were copying the mechanism from a typewriter designed in the early 70s, and they weren't really thinking about re-engineering it to get rid of the stencil position. I don't think mimeograph stencils were being used in the mid-90s, but they kept that position there anyways. But one of the big differences besides the key dejammer is there is a tabulator on the Traveller C. And it is a series of fixed tabs spaced 10 characters apart. So you have fixed tabs. And then the red key next to the space bar is the repeat spacer, like that. So repeat spacer is very cool. You know, this fixed tab system was used also in the Royal Saturn, the electric type bar machine, and they may have had this repeat spacer in some of the other Silver-Seiko models, but the Mercury itself didn't have either the tabulator or the repeat spacer. Now, besides those features, I think one of the other big things about this typewriter is the keyboard. The keyboard is a more modern keyboard. Modern meaning, well, you not only have the number 1 key and the exclamation mark and the plus equals, but you have, I think more importantly, you have the quote and apostrophe here to the right of the colon, semicolon, which is to the right of the L key. I think that's super important for writers who like to write, especially people who write dialogue with contractions that use a lot of apostrophes. It's just so much more convenient than having to use a shifted 8. So the keyboard is like a modern electric typewriter keyboard on the Traveller C, whereas the Royal Mercury, yes, they have the number 1 key here and the plus equals, but they still had the apostrophe as a shifted 8, and they still had the quote mark as a shifted 2. Well, I think we ought to do a typing test here. So this machine, the left feed roller feels like it's a little slipping or whatever, because the paper does go in crooked. I don't think that's indicative of the entire manufacturing run of these machines, but just know that that is an issue with this one. Okay. Well, it is a little bit clumsier typing machine, I would say, than the Royal Mercury. It certainly types okay. It's just for fast touch typing, it's a little bit awkward. I prefer, if I'm going to be typing a long time on this machine, I prefer just to use 2 fingers, index fingers, but that's just me. Yeah, this is actually not too bad of a machine, surprisingly so. So, like the Silver-Seiko made Royal Mercury, this machine is also a half-space machine. So if I press the space bar, the carriage moves a half a character space, and releasing it, it moves the other half. The same thing with the type bars, moves 1/2 when it comes up to the paper, it goes the other half when it releases. So it is a true half-space machine. And also, single line spacing is a double click, so this is a half-line machine as well, which means you can type superscripts and subscripts on it. So I really like the type alignment on this machine. I was very surprised. Here is a typing sample right here. The letters are nice and straight, even. They print very good. And of course, up on top here, it prints red just as fine as black, so the ribbon is fine. It moves very good. Here's your type alignment between upper and lower case. Your on feet in motion looks darn near exact. Well, I think it's important to test type on these machines in order to get a better sense of how they work. And I'm noticing that I do get a little bit of ink smears, both a little bit of red and a little bit of black. So I'm noticing that on the Royal Mercury mechanism, the Silver-Seiko mechanism, there are back tension levers on both ribbon spools that keeps the ribbon a little tighter. But this mechanism, they copied most everything on the Silver-Seiko design, except they didn't put in those spring-loaded levers. And as a consequence, the ribbon is a little looser and it rubs the paper a little bit. So what's the solution to that? Well, probably the only solution is a slightly drier ribbon maybe. But that is one difference that does cause us to have a slightly messier imprint. Well, the imprint itself is clean, but there's a little bit of faint smearing and rubbing around it. Well, I don't see too many Royal Mercuries on the used market these days. They're going to be just like a lot of other mid-20th century typewriters in terms of availability and price. However, I do see more of the Traveller Cs on the market, and the prices, I think, are a little too high. So this gets into the question of who is this typewriter for? If you had to go out to the used market and buy either the Traveller C or the Royal Mercury, one of the other Silver-Seiko Royals, I would say get the Silver-Seiko Royal before you get this. The build quality is a little better, and I think the touch is a little better. But having said that, this isn't really too bad. It's not certainly like those late model Chinese typewriters that feel more like toys and aren't really serious writing instruments. You can write with this. You can take it out. It's a good portable typewriter. I think that's the best use case for this. And I think for short form writing, like going out and writing letters, writing short notes, short thoughts to yourself, short journal entries, or whatever you do, I think it's a good use case. I wouldn't advise, though, using this typewriter for long-form writing, long-form creating. I think you would find it to be less than pleasing in terms of the action. And for me, certainly, I have better experience with this typewriter using the two-finger technique than I do with touch typing. But that's just me. So if you find one of these for inexpensively, I would advise picking it up. I think the Silver-Seiko design is a good portable design in typewriters. This is just built to a slightly less standard of build quality. And with that said, I wish you the very best in your creative pursuits, and as always, stay creative and have yourselves a great day. Bye-bye for now.